Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Talmud class. This coming Shabbat, we are going to chant the blessing of the new month, which will be welcoming the month of Adar. And as all of you know, once we start Adar, it says, Mishe nichnas Adar marvin lesimcha. The one who enters the month of Adar should increase the happiness. But is it possible to increase the happiness in times where there is so much sadness, so much despair? This same weekend that we are going to be welcoming the blessing for the new month is the weekend where the horrible news of Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas, the dead bodies, are returning to Israel after 500 days. So we are going to examine what the musical traditions of Purim tell us about this juxtaposition between happiness and sadness. And we'll get deep into that throughout several different things that happen in the Jewish calendar during the year. But first of all, welcome Wes, welcome back.
Thank you.
And let's thank God for the gift of studying Torah together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam,
asher
קידשנו
במצוותיו
וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. והערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל. ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. ברוך אתה אדוני המלמד תורה לעמו ישראל. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Good morning, colleagues. And it feels impressive to be seated here in the middle. Thank you, Wes, for the honor, and welcome back. So I'd like to divide this class in maybe two parts. The first one will be refreshing some of the knowledge about cantillation itself, the Tamei Amikra, so more like a teaching session, and then we'll get deep into the discussion about this idea of happiness and sorrow at the same time. So if you take the handouts on the first page, we have a brief summary of what cantillation is, and I'm going to read on the second paragraph. Biblical cantillation, the oldest source of Jewish music, is required for anyone who reads the scriptures without a tune shows a disgrace for them and their laws. Disregard. So, moreover, the chanting must adhere to the traditional modes and tunes. So, we have about 6 different systems of chanting. The Torah, Haftarah, and Megillot. Obviously, you have them here at the bottom. Torah and Haftarah, the very distinctive ones. We have a special mode in high holidays, one for Esther and one for Tisha B'Av, Eicha, that are much more related, musically speaking, than we think. And then another one that is shared by the 3 Megillot at the bottom. So if we take the, at the bottom of the first paragraph, it says, in Ezra's time, 500 years before the Common Era, the Torah was read also on Mondays and Thursdays, and he introduced the readings in the Mincha service of Shabbat. And then it tells us when each one of these started. The custom in reading prophets dates back to the Second Commonwealth. The book of Esther has been read since the period of the Maccabees in the 2nd century. Lamentations since the destruction of the temple, Second Temple, and the Songs of Songs, Roots, and Ecclesiastes since the 1st century. At the very bottom of this page, we have that the system as we know it has been developed by Aaron ben Asher, one of the Masoretes, in the 6th and 7th century. So always the Torah and the texts were read by using the Te'amim, but the person who puts them together was Aaron ben Asher. So Aliza, I'd like to invite you to read on the second page, the first paragraph, getting deeper into Megillat Esther. And one thing to have in mind is that the happiest day or happiest Jewish holiday among all of them during the year is Purim. And we have to examine that. So, Alisa, would you read the first paragraph, please?
The book of Esther has one very unusual distinction. Certain verses from Esther are not chanted to Esther trope at all, but rather to the cantillation of Eicha. The cantillation for Esther, more than in any other book, specifically illustrates the text, often connecting it to a midrash. For example, Midrash Esther 2:11 tells us that the vessels used at Achashverosh's feast were the same as those taken from the temple by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 before the Common Era. Therefore, the melody changes from the joyous trope of Megillat Esther to the melodies of Eicha, the scroll traditionally read on Tisha B'Av.
Thank you, Elisa. So the first question that stands out for me is, how is it possible that in such a happy moment that we have Purim, we all of a sudden change the musical formula to be mindful of the destruction of the temple? And it's part of the text, but why? I mean, why do we need to, in such moments of happiness? We are going to examine later the different sources, but at least for me, my happiest day of my life was when I got married to Lorena. And at the end, we all know that we break the glass. And there are different traditions. One of the meetings is the destruction of Jerusalem, that we cannot be happy because of that. How is it possible? And the second question is it possible to hold both feelings with the same intensity? When we are happy, go to sadness and vice versa, but experience both at the same time, or there is one that is more dominant than the other? So then, can you read at the very bottom the small font that it says notes on the trope formulas?
Sure. Thank you for letting me read the small font. Okay.
Special gift for you, Dan.
Yeah. The musical formulas that are used for the reading of the Megillah on Purim bear strong resemblance to those used for Tisha B'Av, but they are not of a mournful nature at all. They seem to be rather suitable for narrative and storytelling. Several short passages in the Purim Megillah, which allude to the destruction of the temple, are chanted with the trope melodies of Megillat Eicha. There are several other short passages that are traditionally not chanted with the trope, but with other special melodies. The student who wishes to learn all the melodies of these exceptional passages may find them in the Purim Anthology by Philip Goodman, etc. But there are other sources as well.
So thank you then. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? So if you examine musically speaking, we have different traditions, depending on if the Jews come from Lithuania or from Ukraine, or different musical traditions. But there are, if you take the sheet music, at least 7 or 8 tamim sound exactly the same in Eicha that they sound in Esther. Fascinating, right? So if we take on page 3 all the verses. So Wes, can I ask you to read the English of chapter 4, verse 3?
Yes. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a sad text, okay? So I'm going to give you the example of how to chant this. So if I will be chanting this with the regular Esther tropes, I would sing it. אבל גדול ליהודים, בצאן ובכי ומספר, שק באפר, יוצא לערבים. But instead we chanted with אבל גדול ליהודים, בצאן ובכי ומספר, שק באפר, יוצא לערבים. So that was a little show off, and thank you for everybody for allowing me to do that. But then you are the expert here, because you read the Megillah every year for the last 57 years or something. What do you make of this? What do you make of all these verses that, that they have this special melody?
Yeah, so my take on that is something that we've all been living and experiencing, the fact that we can live with joy and sadness at the same time. So, for example, October 7th happened, but yet we have smachot that we go to. We have, Brit Milah in our congregation. We have weddings. We have other simchas, that are joyful. And the complex question in the West, I'm going to quote you, because many years ago you said that living a Jewish life is like walking a tightrope, in the sense that that there's always a balance between joy and sadness, so that even in our great moments, as you mentioned for the wedding, even in our great moments of joy, we also are mindful of the fact that that there's sadness as well. And every one of us, we can live in joy, but also have some complex sadness in our lives at the same time.
What I love about
No. Yeah, go ahead, Alisa.
I was going to say, what I love about the Tamim, particularly in Esther, And this is not the only time. We sometimes have leading up to the holidays where we have echoes of other things. What I love about the power of the Ta'amim is it sort of mirrors the human reality. That often when you're grieving, often when you're mourning, often when you have something else that's happening in the back of your mind, you know, people who are grieving often talk about they'll be in the grocery store and they walk by the apples and they'll think about, oh, my beloved always loved Fuji apples. Like, and that just, they get hit by a wave of grief seeing the apples, and that's there for a moment, and they go back to thinking about the rest of their life. And that we hear musically so powerfully the way, and in Esther's my favorite trope system because it has such character and such drama and such intrigue, and when it shifts, you all of a sudden it slows down, you feel it, and then you're like, oh, we're back to the carnival. It's so much fun.
Right, but Alisa, good point. You made a great point, and I want to ask Michelle and Wes your opinion on this. I don't buy it. I don't buy it.
At
I
all?
love the musical tradition, the changing from one thing to the other, but I'm in the middle of Purim, booing Haman and, doing all the cheering up stuff and being with the teens and the kids, and then we go to this. And to me, this is whoosh. Like one famous rabbi once said, whoosh, Right. So it doesn't do it to me. It doesn't do it, and it doesn't do it in a wedding when it's the happiest day of my life, and then I'm breaking the glass, and I'm not thinking about Jerusalem and the breaking of the glass, and I'm not thinking, please, I want you to convince me at the end of this class that both things at the same time are possible, but I strongly believe that one dominates the other.
But have you never experienced like two things at the same moment?
Yeah, sometimes you cry both of happiness and sadness at the same time. Wes, what's your take on this?
Yeah, Les, I have the strongest memory of being in Teaneck, New Jersey in the 1990s. I think it was 1995, 1994, 1995. And this is post Oslo, and it was the explosion of bus number 18, and that killed many innocent people. One of them was from Teaneck, a woman named Sarah Duker. She was dating a rabbinical student named Matthew Eisenfeld, and explosion of bus number 18 happened, and then that very week was Purim, and we were at Rabbi Eric Irvis's Reform Synagogue for Megillat Esther, and I remember thinking, wow, this is so cacophonous to have Purim and festivity, and then the explosion of bus number 18 and somebody in our community who died, and how do you do that? And I remember at the time thinking, wow, and he talked about the mixed message of those emotions. And now I think a generation later that October 7th is explosion of bus number 18 on steroids times forever and times infinity. All this, that was a horrific moment. This has been a horrific 16 months, and it never ends. And actually, it gets even worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so that was a walk in the park comparison to what the entire Jewish people, the state of Israel, are going through on an ongoing basis, as your prelude began, with more yet to come. And so I feel like, so I think that we have no choice but to figure out how to do both emotions at the same time.
Yeah, so Michelle, before I hear you, again, going back to this Shabbat, as you know well, what the order we normally do after Haftarah is we do the prayer for the country, the prayer for Israel, and if there is a blessing for the Rosh Chodesh, that follows immediately after. So this Shabbat, most likely, we are going to be doing Acheinu for the hostages, thinking about those who are home, but also the ones who are dead. And then immediately after, no break, I'm singing, Mishe Asani Sim Laboteinu with a melody of There Was Once a Wicked Man with all the cheering up and stuff. It's very hard to possibly channel both strong feelings of both sadness and happiness.
I think that's why I find this so comforting, right? Because you have to kind of push yourself. I'll never forget Lisa on Simchat Torah, right, after October 7th. And we had all these little children who came into the room. And Elisa, like just in one of your greatest moments I've ever seen, you said, these are children before me, and I'm going to make this holiday for them, and you did, and I looked at you with like I still don't know how you managed to summon that, because it was beyond my capacity to summon in that moment, and I think in some sense maybe out of a nod to that phenomenon, like, yes, we have made it on Purim. We are going to do the joy. We're there. We hit the mitzvah of experiencing the joy that we have to experience in our world. But like, this is a nod to the fact that you might not be quite there. And to me, I always find when we hear these lines, like, it would be very strange to hear there was great mourning among the Jews. Happy, there was great mourning. Woohoo, everybody, right? Like, it's a nod to the reality that we see. And I think every single one of these verses feels to me like it says, all right, well, we can't, like, okay, guys, we can't quite stay there for the whole time.
Elias, can I ask a question about music? You've talked about two emotions. You've talked about joy and sadness and how those are reflected. I'm wondering about a third emotion, or a third and a fourth emotion, which is anger and hatred, and a fifth emotion, which is revenge. Hatred, anger, and revenge. And I'm thinking about, so I know how that's reflected textually. It's textually reflected in the later chapter of the Megillah, the one we never really talk about, which is all the tens of thousands of Persians that the Jews killed, right? Once they were given, once they were told by the reigning authority, you can do to them whatever you want, they did whatever they wanted, and they killed tens of thousands. And then, of course, on the Shabbat before Purim, we read the story about commit genocide against Amalek, the special haftarah from Samuel. I'm wondering, how are those darker, deeper emotions that we don't like to talk about, hatred, anger, and the human desire for revenge, how are those reflected musically?
Then you are the expert here on Purim, but I don't believe that we have such a thing musically speaking. Alisa?
There's one thing I think of, which is the tradition of reciting all of Haman's sons in one breath. And that to me has always felt like such an important teaching, because on the one hand, you don't want to give any extra air. But on the other hand, the practice of reciting all of those names in one breath means you run out of breath. And it feels like a warning to me, which is that revenge, that hatred, that anger has the potential to suck out your own life force as you're carrying it out.
Well, but at the same time, Alisa, and then correct me if I'm wrong, that is done with a regular tamim, right?
Totally.
It's not that.
Totally.
It's not
No,
that
this is just about the amount of
we do
air
it,
that
we
you
do
get.
it faster, but we don't change the melody.
And less, and therefore, so very often it's the silence that's the noisiest, right? It's the absence of sound that makes the largest sound. What do you make of the fact that there's a special cantillation for sad and a special cantillation for happy, and not a special cantillation for anger, hatred, and revenge? What do you make of that silence?
That's a very difficult question, Wes, to answer. And we tend to think that our musical traditions are not meant for that. That it won't get us to a nicer place, and we try to avoid that. That's my interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I see, at least in your question, right, one possible answer that reveals itself, which is that we always talk about at the Song of the Sea that God says to the angels, don't sing, my creatures are drowning, but does not say that to the humans, right? The humans actually experience that emotion of whatever it is that is revenge or joy in the destruction of an enemy. And, the last part of the Megillah gives that same mode to us of, you're not only allowed but encouraged to feel that the destruction of evil is something that one should celebrate in this world, and maybe not with it takes something for us, so we don't want to live there, and we don't want to live there for long, but there is evil in this world, and there's some level at which our tradition, perhaps in not changing the trope, although I don't know what the other options would be, tells us that it's very human to be able to say, if I see evil destroyed, there's a piece of me that that
in addition,
should
I'm
be.
just thinking out loud, Wes, about your question. There are moments in the Megillah, then you know well that we are supposed to be chanting parts of it when mentions Amelech with the high holiday nusach of Amelech, right? So that evokes more like a triumph, like a style of music that is in a major key that, you know, remember the old movies of the Romans when they will come and they will blow the trumpets before somebody will read the entire page? They were always in a major key, you know, you know, something, and our tradition reflects that in the Nusach.
Elias, I want to go back to something, but thinking about another musical tradition, like in Megillat Eicha, we have the melody for chapter 3, which I don't know if that could be considered like a revenge kind of thing. It's more sad. I mean, it's different and stands out. It's, you know, it's the tradition is that it's Jerusalem herself speaking and crying.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how that actually would affect your idea of Wes, your idea about like if that's an anger, a hatred kind of thing, a revenge kind of thing or not. But
all right, everybody.
yeah.
So let's continue with this text. Let's go to page 5, and Michelle, I want you to read this beautiful thing about Rabbi Nachman of Breslau.
In his famous parable about Simcha, joy, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov recognizes the assumption that we need to push aside suffering in order to find joy. He illustrates this by describing a circle of people dancing and singing who notice a sad person on the side. The people dancing often think that they need to pull him into the circle in order to cheer him up, that he should be rallied into finding joy by excluding his sadness. However, Rabbi Nachman teaches the higher form of simcha, joy, is instead to find the courage to sit with sadness and to gently introduce it to joy, allowing both of them to coexist. Not only is this a way of achieving true joy, he says, but it's also a way to bring kedusha, holiness,
Thank
to
you,
our
Michelle.
lives.
There is one word that for me it's key here, and I love it, which is gently. All right, where it says to sit with sadness and to gently introduce it to joy. But our Jewish liturgy doesn't reflect that gently factor. All right, let's go to the next 2 pages. If we start by page 7, we have the Mourner's Kaddish here. And this Mourner's Kaddish, as you can see, is page 338 from the Siddur. This is the end of the Iskor service that we recite 4 times a year: Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So gently, where is gently here? As soon as we finish 338, we go to 339, where we recite Ashrei. Sometimes we skip it and we go to the procession. But in the tradition, it says, Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yalelu hasela. Joyous are they who dwell in your house. Joyous, the people who are so favored. So where is the gently part here? Where is the gentle transition here? And I don't understand why, among all the prayers that we could put after Iskor, we put Ashrei.
I actually interpret Ashrei from a different, it may not be the right spelling, but I think it's from the word asher, which means it's not necessarily joy, but richness. And so therefore I think that changes the texture of the text.
Yeah, Elias, I don't think there's, for me personally, my neshama, I don't think there's truer words in all of our canon than Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. And the most important part is Yoshvei Veitecha, the people who sit in your house. And I think the most evocative time is precisely when you've had a loss, because it's so overpoweringly tempting when you've had a loss to shrink and to contract, and that your world gets smaller, and that you close the door, and the darkness descends at 4 o'clock, and you don't really get out. And Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, to me, is very gentle. It is get your butt out of the house, get in the car, go to synagogue, be with people, put your social face on, sit next to somebody. They'll answer Amen to your Kaddish, you'll answer Amen to their Kaddish. You'll daven, you'll sit and have a bagel, you'll talk about the weekend. And that's day after day, morning after night, for days, weeks, months, years. That's very gentle. So it's not Ashrei, it's Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. Happy is somebody who develops a pattern of being able to sit which is also the same word and the same verb in the Rebbe Nachman parable. Let them sit with. Let them sit with their emotions.
So Wes, you talk so beautifully, and thank you. Your words are so inspiring, but I disagree with you. So because for us clergy, we know very well that it's very different when we are chanting something from the book in a way, and then we have to do the same thing when we have a loss, when we experience a loss. The first time I did this call for my dad, I was weeping, and then I had to go to Ashrei. That Ashrei didn't work for me. That Ashrei was completely out of place, wasn't gently. For me, for example, I'm talking about criticizing the order of the liturgy, but I would have done like a different way of increasing, slowly. For example, Adon Olam, it's a prayer that always speaks to me at the very end. Beyado afkid ruhi betisham yaira, Adonai li velo ira. God is with me. I will not fear. So in moments of sadness, you need somebody who comes and says, it's okay, I'm with you. Don't be afraid. And then slowly you increase the but I mean, it's completely acceptable what you said as well.
So I love that, and I'm wondering why, because I think you're both right, and I'm wondering whether this trope change in the Megillah is actually relevant to what you're talking about, because you're talking about the language of Ashrei, right? That it's to sit in this house, and you're talking about the feeling of Ashrei Yoshvei Veitacha Od Yahalelucha Sala, right? Coming out in
not quite in the tone of the kids, but
that's
close.
I tried, right? And like there's a jarring thing about doing the regular melody right then, and I wonder if we could pull a Megillat Esther move and put the equivalent of an Eicha trope. Like, what if we sang in that moment the beautiful Ashrei melody that you sing in Shacharit?
And we reflect
Would
that in our
be more
tradition.
gentle?
One Shabbat we do Ashrei Yoshvei Veitech, and then sometimes we do Ashrei, which is more reflective, much mellow. There is something to be said about the kind of melodies you choose to interpret each one of the prayers. Alisa.
There's also, I think, it's so interesting because I actually think tradition has a gentle exit, but we don't feel it that way. Because if you look at the words of Mourner's Kaddish, if you take away the title Mourner's Kaddish, it's actually exactly that. God is going to be with you. God is going to be great and awesome. God is going to support you through this moment. God is always there. Even when you lose somebody else, God is with you and God cares about you. And then we get to Ashrei. And that's after, right? The El Male Rachamim is really the prayer of sadness and grief and being with you in your grief. And then the Kaddish is like the stepping stone out. We say it as an expression of grief, but I don't think what the liturgy says itself. And then, so I think if you read that Kaddish as a step ladder to the next emotion, then you get to your Ashrei. Now, I'm not trying to say that your experience of it is wrong. I'm just saying, like, I think that in the tradition, there's
I like that explanation, Alisa, and I agree with you, because normally, we tell our mourners that the Kaddish, it's a prayer they should say, but actually there is no reference about the death. It's about praising God. Let's move on into page 10, and I want to bring another example. So page 10, we have here a copy of the Luach that we use, that it's very helpful. And here's another contrast. We have Yom HaZikaron, and then immediately after, as you know, Yom HaAtzmaut. Okay? And let's Alisa, can you read a little bit where it says Yom HaZikaron, that square, the things we are supposed to be doing?
Yes. The Knesset in Israel has officially designated the day before Yom HaAtzmaut as Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terrorism. Appropriate observances include adding relevant readings to the service, lighting a yahrzeit candle, reciting Al Mali Rachamim, adding Kadshe Klali, a communal mourner's Kaddish recited by those who have lost one or both parents.
And can you read on the next side of it, Yom HaAtzmaut?
The Knesset has officially designated the 5th of Iyar as Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. When that day falls on Shabbat, as it does this year, Yom HaAtzmaut is moved to the 3rd of Iyar, so that festivities do not interfere with Shabbat. In addition to the ritual observances, the following are customary. Eating a festive meal that includes foods from Israel, singing songs related to Israel. Also, all mourning practices associated with the Omer period are suspended. For example, weddings and other communal celebrations are permitted, and haircuts are permitted.
So we go from El Maleh Rahamim to a wedding. How do you like this contrast, colleagues?
I was
And
thinking-
I know we are used to, because for those who have been in Israel and experienced the sorrow and joy going from, all of the sudden is something that we are used to. But Michelle, what's your take on this? If you had the opportunity, would you have placed these two commemorations together?
I don't know. In all humility, I don't know whether I would have had that insight, but I think it's a very powerful one, because there is, much like the Ashrei, right after you do Yisker, that sense of, and we are still here, right? We have mourned. We are mourning. We don't stop mourning. That continues. That walks with us. But we are here. And as long as we are here, our task in this world is to find some way towards gratitude and some way towards, if not enjoyment, at least thankfulness for the opportunity to make another day, to make another difference.
Yeah, I was thinking about the juxtaposition. Let's say that you're a person whose yortzeit occurs on Purim. How did I know specific people for whom that's the case, and that's very complex. I remember actually going to a shiva minyan several times, where in a traditional family where they wanted the entire Megillah read at the shiva minyan, and that's a very interesting juxtaposition. Reading the even though with the with the special melodies for Eicha, bringing this joyful celebration into a shiva minyan was it was jarring for me. I'm not sure how the family took it, but it was jarring for me to do that. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry, colleagues, that I insist on this, but my whole theme today is not to criticize, and actually I think it's something that is really beautiful in our traditions, both in the liturgy and in the music, that we can have different moods and different prayers to reflect the different feelings. But what I'm a little puzzled by is this idea that they have to be back to back.
But what's
with
wrong
no
with-
anesthesia. It's like
what's
getting
wrong
a
with-
pull, the tooth pulled out of the dentist. The dentist, hey, Elias, how are you doing? Tell me about your family.
But what's wrong with jarring, right? I mean, I think, look, I still have an 11-year-old, so I see a lot of very jarring emotions, right? 1 minute playing happy, bouncing, enjoying the next minute, right? Like, kids know how to fully express the emotions that they feel and roll with them through life. And to say that this moment here gave me one emotion, I haven't quite wrapped it up, but I'm ready for the next one.
Elias, I find this very powerful because it's life. It is life. You think about, and by the way, it's life and it's Judaism. If you zoom out and you think about Pesach, which is the big holiday after Purim, we're talking about Purim, think about Pesach. All the main symbols cut both ways, and they cut both ways at the same time. Matzah is the bread of affliction, and it's the bread of liberation. An egg is springtime. An egg is what you eat after mourning. The cups of wine are the cups of redemption. The cups of wine are the blood spilled of Hebrew newborns, spilled in the Nile. Everything cuts both ways. And so I guess my question to you is trying to understand why you have a problem with it, because it feels like the liturgy is just capturing that aspect of life that you laid your mother to her rest, and then you come back to your growing boys and their successes in their walks of life and this job that you love and your marriage and your home, and they're both true at the same time. And the liturgy feels like it captures they're both true at the same time.
Yes, I agree with you, but I think that people are very different from each other. And in my own case, I sometimes, when I'm very happy, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to read anything that would make me sad, and vice versa, because I want to feel, exactly get into deeper feelings of being sad, because I think that it's necessary to heal ourselves and to move forward. So to me, we are all used to all these traditions and orders of services and different things, but not necessarily always works for me.
I was speaking with one of our members who was at Auschwitz on January 27th, which was the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And he asked me a very evocative question. He said, could you imagine a Jewish story without suffering? And I said, no, there is no Jewish story without suffering. That suffering is baked into our cake. There is no Jewish story without suffering. Suffering comes with, like batteries included. And if you think about Brit Bein HaBetarim, the covenant God makes with Abraham, this is the happy time. This is like have Andrews be serving the appetizers and be pouring the Chardonnay. This is the happy time. This is the beginning of it. And God says, oh, by the way, your descendants are going to be slaves for 400 years. It just feels like suffering comes with. Every generation they want to kill us. So I guess my question to you is, if you think that those texts are onto something, that it's impossible to imagine our story without suffering. Suffering comes with, then doesn't that have to get reflected in music that can be simultaneously joyful and somber?
Yeah. Thank you for your point, Wes. And yeah, we reflect that with music and with the Nusach. Alisa, thank you for suggesting the next text. We have two more things that I want to go over quickly. Page 11. So we are talking about weddings, and the general idea is that we break the glass at the very end because it reminds us of the Temple of Jerusalem and that destroyed. But actually, can you read, Alisa, where it says some background in the middle of the page?
The Gemara in Brachos 30b relates the story of Mar. Mar, the son of Ravina, made a wedding feast for his son, and he saw the sages who were excessively joyous. He brought a valuable cup worth 400 zuz, like the equivalent of $1 million, and broke it before them, and they became sad. The same happens at the wedding of Rav Ashi's son. Rav Ashi saw that the students were getting a bit too happy. He brought a very expensive cup and broke it in front of them in order to stem the flow of happiness. From here, it became customary to break a cup at a wedding. This custom remains with us today.
What do you make of that?
So we had a little pregame conversation. I happen to love this because the Talmudic explanation for why we break a glass has nothing to do with the destruction of the temple and has everything to do with getting so carried away in your joy that you're not aware of other emotions. And to me, the rabbis are like, you as a human, you always have to be feeling what's all around you. You can't just be in one mode. You have to be in multiple modes. You have to be aware of everything. And if you're not, I'm gonna destroy this beautiful property in order to bring you back to earth a little bit.
See, to me, this makes me think of a frat party. Like,
it does have
where
that vibe.
you call the police because they're already destroying the meaning.
Wait. I need to stop you here. Thank you, colleagues, because we can discuss this for hours. All right. Can you tell me, with a hand in your heart, that at your wedding day, all of you, when you were in that joy, that moment, you broke the glass or your husband broke the glass and you were in deep sorrow at the moment?
But that's not the feeling of it. And that's why I love this, because it's not about deep sorrow. It's about the shadow. And there's different interpretations of the breaking of the glass. There's an interpretation of the breaking of the glass. One of the things I talk about couples is like, this should be the only brokenness that you experience, and that you should experience any brokenness with the kind of love that surrounds you on the day of your wedding. Or that it's a paradigm shift, and just like God pulled God's self in order to create the ability for the world to evolve, and then God could not be fit in these vessels, and the vessel shattered, that there's a new world paradigm that's being created by your marriage, and then the vessels can't hold it, and it shatters through.
I'm still stuck at the
see it
frat
on your
party.
face.
No, look. I love that, Elisa. I love that you brought the original text, because it doesn't have, that connection that we put on it. And there's so many. I mean, I usually give 3 different interpretations for the breaking of the glass at every wedding, and I think we really can put a gloss on it. But you asked the question, how did we feel in that moment?
I'm talking about feelings.
Right. So feelings, right? So in that moment, right, I can tell you, not necessarily at my own wedding, but at so many weddings that I've been to where you have sung Im Eshkachech, under the chuppah, it really, at least for me, emotionally works to feel like, whether it is that the bride and groom are thinking about, the brokenness and the destruction of the temple, maybe not, but the brokenness of the world around them, the missing people who are not there in that moment who they love. Yeah, I mean, I will often see brides and grooms with tears in their eyes in that moment.
Wes?
Yeah, I love this because here's the question: what's the opposite of this? What's the opposite of what we're talking about? And the opposite, Paul Simon was singing with Sabrina Carpenter, Homeward Bound for SNL, and SNL at 50. And Paul Simon, to me, one of his iconic songs is "I am a rock, I am an island," because a rock never cries and an island doesn't feel. And what I think our tradition inspires us to do is not only to feel, but to be open to the full palette. Like, live your life with a full palette. It's like a painter that has a full palette to capture all the infinite nuance of the world. I think our tradition, and now our musical tradition, inspires us, bring your full palette, because boy, life is so complex, and it is so complex at the same time. And the alternative to that is to be a rock, is to be an island, is to be a character in Paul Simon's song. And you can, but that's not the way I want to live. I want to live with emotion. Well, once I'm going to live with emotion, I'm not going to be a rock. I'm not going to be an island. I need a big palette. I need a lot of happy. I need a lot of sad. And I need both at the same time.
Thank you, Wes. So I'd like to conclude on pages 14 and 15 with this beautiful text by Rabbi Joel Mosbacher. So he starts talking about, Tu B'Av and Tisha B'Av, comparing them both. And then also mentions a little bit about this idea of, that we not we because we are conservative, but in many Reformed congregations and even in Israel, Simchat Torah and Iskor are in the same day. We recite Iskor in Shmini Atzeret, but not in Simchat Torah with the middle of Akafot. Then we go to Iskor. So then, can you go to the bottom of page 15? And I'd like to conclude with these two texts. Can you read the first paragraph where it says, "If we could choose"?
If we could choose, most of us, no doubt, would prefer if we could separate our joyous experiences from our sad ones, if we must have them at all. It's especially complicated and emotionally challenging when an illness or a death occurs in close proximity to a wedding or a baby naming. But alas, we don't usually get to schedule these peak moments, nor can we control the events that happen around them. We experience joy, and then something difficult comes into our lives. We experience a death, and then we wonder whether we should go on with a long-planned celebration.
Thank you. Wes, can you read the last paragraph starting with Judaism?
Judaism is teaching us a lesson through this calendrical juxtaposition. Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. When you've come through a difficult time, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. It won't always be dark and difficult, even when you can't imagine ever seeing the light again. And at the same time, when you're feeling on top of the world, Gam ze ya'avor, this too shall pass. Make time, therefore, to appreciate every moment of joy, dancing, singing, and abundance. They won't last forever. They too shall pass. Therefore, savor them while you've got them.
Beautiful. I think that this last paragraph summarizes everything we've been discussing today. Thank you, all of you colleagues, for your wonderful reflections. I would like to hear all of you quickly, your last conclusions of this, and what can you suggest to me that I'm a little, taken by this idea that they come too soon, back to back. Then?
I'm with Wes on his last comment that, the joy, the full palette is really what we live every day. We can't live in total joy. We can't live in total sadness. And living with them simultaneously is part of the human condition. It's part of what God created for us. And the musical traditions that you brought to us, we reflect that as part not only of a Jewish tradition, but the human condition as well.
Michelle?
So I'm still reflecting on your wedding question about my own wedding. And I think back, I was so young in that moment. And, could I really appreciate the sadness? I hadn't experienced any loss at that point of any great significance. I was filled with so much joy. Don't bother me now. I've got so much joy. And as you shared your story of your wedding, similarly, right, just caught up in all of that love and that joy. But I think as we grow older, right, we experience more that takes more from us and stretches us to have to evolve that capacity for carrying both and for acknowledging both and for seeking that moment that acknowledges, like, we might be happy, but actually it's not all that way. And so maybe this is part of a life process that we grow to expand that palette.
Alisa.
I feel it's important to say we haven't talked about the important role of chemical intoxication on this holiday, but I do think that part of the power of Purim is getting us outside of what normally feels comfortable to us, and literally biochemically moving ourselves to a place of extreme feeling, and I love that about Purim.
Talking about drinking.
Yes, getting drunk specifically. Because I think that the melodies, the experience of this crazy story and the crazy joys and the crazy sorrows and the intensity and the hatred, all of that is made possible not by a sober experience. And I think that's important, that Purim says, get out of how you normally experience. Get out of your normal paradigms. Get out of who you normally are. Get out of what is a normal emotional palette for you, and go to the extreme and feel something extremely, whether it's joy or sadness. And I really love and appreciate that. It's not something you do every day. We don't get drunk every day. This is a one-day thing and a one-time experience where we say, I'm going to give myself over to emotion, and that's one of the things I love about the holiday.
Thank you, Elisa. So, Wes, I took your chair, but I'm not taking away the final reflection of the class. So, can you conclude our class?
Yeah, I think this is kind of built on what Michelle was saying. I've been thinking as I was listening to this class, how Judaism ages so well. When you're a kid, I think you're more capable of feeling just pure joy. You fall in love for the first time. Oh my God, you fall in love. Your heart is beating. And if the person you love loves you back, oh my God, that's just 100% joy. You're a kid and you've worked hard and you get into the college you want to get into. Oh my God, my future is bright. Or you're a kid and you're really good at singing, or you're really good at dancing, or you're really good at cheer, or you're really good at drama, and you excel and you get a role and you shine. Oh my God, right? That's when you're a kid, when you're in your early 20s, etc. By the time, as you age, though, you just accumulate losses. You accumulate losses. People you love get sick and die. You age, etc., etc., etc. It's easy when you're 15, 18, 20, 25. Those also have their challenges, but it's easier to feel pure joy. By the time you get older and older and older, even if you throw a simcha, somebody you love is not thriving, right? You finally marry off one kid, but an older sibling is not married still, right? You have another, you have a child who has a child, but another child doesn't have a child, et cetera, et cetera. So there's 1,000 forms of wow and oi at the same time, oi and joy at the same time, as they say. And so I think that Judaism ages really well. It's just really helpful to come from a religious tradition that says have a very big palate, because if we're blessed to live longer, the longer we live, the more we will need that big palate.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Beautifully talking. It's such a pleasure to do these classes with you.
Thank you,
So
Elias.
we'll see you on Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, yasher koach.